Okay. We're live. Cool. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's meeting of the Environment Committee. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note, this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Thank you. Okay, so on to agenda item 1. Do we have any appointment of substitutes?
There are no substitutes, Chair, but we do have apologies from Councillor Hassan. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? Okay, take that as none. Do we have any public participation?
None, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, minutes of the last meeting. Just take them all in one go. Any comments? Everyone happy with them?
They are brilliant minutes.
Okay. Take that as those minutes are being accepted. Okay, on to agenda item 5, which is an update on Ash dieback. So,
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm going to present the report as Mark Bayliss is unable to attend this evening. I've also got with me Harry Sim, who is our tree officer. He's my expert, so any questions at the end I will direct to Harry's expertise. This obviously is an update report for committee, just setting out where we currently are with our managing ash dieback, and that we're recommending that we'll bring a further report with some more indicative costs and a more established action plan that we'll bring to the next committee. So this is just giving us a quick update. So as you may or may not be aware, ash dieback is quite established in significant areas across Worcester City. And while though not every ash tree is currently showing signs of disease, this report does contain in Appendix 1 2 images within the city that are showing signs of disease for your information. The assessment of the stress indicators of our infected trees suggests that ash dieback is significantly affecting trees within Worcester for about 3 to 4 years. We're currently adopting the recommendation from the Tree Council, the Suffolk County Council Ash Health Assessment System, of which Harry is currently putting an action plan together to support us finding out exactly the extent of the problem within the city. As you can see within Appendix 2 of the report, the reference photographs form part of that assessment with Class 1, Class 2, Class 3, Class 4. So you can see those in the Appendix 2. And the figures estimated at Worcester City, but this is a guesstimate at the moment until we've done further inspections throughout the next few months with trees in the surrounding geographical areas. As soon as a tree is obviously infected and is quite apparent, few trees survive longer than 4 years. And whilst trees exhibit different levels of resistance to the disease, once a tree shows significant signs of stress, the recovery is impossible. It's projected that the bulk of the ash trees within the city should be conducted within a removal over the next 3 years. And this is based upon current observations of our current ash trees and the rate of the disease progression reported. And that's also seen with comparable sites within neighbouring counties. We feel that it is reasonable to assume that there will be expected eventual losses of at least 95% of our ash trees within the City Council-owned land, particularly in areas of the plantation and woods. And trees standing alone do appear to survive longer than the trees in the wooded area. So at this moment, and again, it is indicative in the report that we'll bring back for the committee, we estimate that there will be about 2,000 to 4,000 ash trees that will be of a size that will require intervention on City Council's land. Previous survey work has estimated that ash is approximately 8% of Worcester's tree population, although distribution is focused on several areas across the city. The areas that we're seeing the highest concentration is Warndon Villages, and during its development, ash was 40% of the total trees that were planted there. And with regeneration and losses, some of the areas are now as high as 80% ash. So we could see, and again, this is an estimate until we do the actual inspections, that we could lose potentially 50% of total canopy cover. There are also large mature areas of trees that are prominent in Gellervale, Diglas, Lansdowne and Aswood Cemetery, and so these areas could also be prone to significant losses. The next steps for us is to continue to formalise the action plan that will be based upon the template from the Tree Council, and that's currently being drawn up to look at how we can combat ash dieback, and we're going to bring that back to the June committee along with indicative costs that we may be looking at to resolve the issues. We also are looking at launching a citizen science project which will gather more accurate ash census and the condition data, and we're going to involve obviously Worcestershire Wildlife Trust and Worcester Environment Group, along with residents and volunteers that we think are quite key in supporting this programme. As part of the developing communication strategy, you'll have probably seen that we have had an article raising the awareness in City Life, and we will also be installing signage and making sure that we've got a clear public communication plan that's going to develop that public awareness and understanding of ash dieback disease before widespread tree losses become evident. So we feel it's very important that we start involving our residents and our ward members. And this will also include advice to private landowners of their responsibility and guidance for managing diseased trees. Our action plan will be looking at the city-owned trees, but we will obviously will support private landowners in helping them to combat the disease. We feel that if the action plan is managed correctly, the removal of ash trees will lead to an overall improvement both of the amenity value but also the ecological value of Worcester's wooded areas. And during the tree removal, every opportunity will be taken to create wildlife features such as standing deadwood. We'll also look at investigating sale of wood product and offset the additional costs of ash tree removal as part of the action plan. And it may be also possible to use some of the wooded product for natural play equipment in coordination with the strategic play area development plan. A programme of extensive replanting will also be part of the action plan to ensure that we repopulate areas with ash trees, and this will be planned in advance of the felling and forming part of that action plan. And as always, members and the committee will be consulted regarding ash removal in their wards and be part of any replanting programmes. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Do we? Yes, Karen?
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering whether it'd be useful for Harry to explain how the disease showing in the ash trees, how their removal is different to other trees, because I know that part of the problem is that trees don't look as poorly when you need to take them down. Thank you.
Okay, so as the disease progresses from the leaves inward, wood dies. The branches fail and become desiccated, dried out, and they begin to split. If you cut through diseased trees, when you fell diseased trees, you can quite often see that the fibres are already splitting apart, in that star-shaped pattern that you get in dried firewood. As a result, for a climber, there's more risk of branches breaking underneath their feet. there's more risk of anchor points failing, and there's much more risk of wood splitting apart as it's cut, barber chairing it's called in the industry. It just makes the trees much more accident prone. Once we see a tree reach class 3 on the assessment system, I would tell our tree team that that tree is not to be climbed. As a result, we have to bring in extra equipment. We have to use our platform. If the platform isn't accessible, we may need to use other options for dismantling trees down in areas with very poor access. That could get much more expensive.
Yeah, and Chair, just to add to that, I think it was when Sandra presented the report, she's mentioned the report that will come back to committee, and obviously Harry and the team will develop an action plan, but the likelihood is there will also be a funding request attached to that action plan for the reasons Harry has just set out. So we probably feel that given the extent of the challenge over the next couple of years, we may not have the resource within in-house or some of the equipment that we would need. So the report that will come in June will likely to be including a funding ask.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things. 2.9, once infection is apparent, few trees survive longer than 4 years, okay. The question is about trees exhibiting different levels of resistance to the disease. Now, my thinking is that if a tree has got a reasonable resistance to the disease, it would be better to keep it than to fell it. So at what point do you make that decision? Because it must be to the general advantage to preserve some resistant stock from which we can replace this tree in the future. I know there are strains being developed, presumably GM strains that have some kind of resistance. They're not native species, and if we can hold on to the trees which have got some resistance. So I'd just like to find out at what point we give up all hope. Is it what is indicated in 2.8, where once infection is positively diagnosed, then you're going to fell it? Or is it at the point in 2.9 where it shows significant signs of stress? The other point is really just a cautionary tale. Warndon Villages, which was developed 40 years ago, it seems that the tree planting was so heavily dependent on ash, presumably because other species were suspect. We had Dutch elm disease, etc. Now we're faced with possibly 50% of the tree cover disappearing. That indicates to me, and I know we're looking back with 40 years of hindsight, but that area should never have been so heavily planted with one kind of tree. Presumably ash was a cheap option at the time, but what a disastrous mistake that's been.
Okay, so your query regarding resistance, stress indicators are a sign that the tree is not particularly resistant. We identify resistant trees by comparison to their neighbours. We are identifying resistant trees. There's several that I've already flagged, and they won't be removed. We're not going to be going in removing trees, just sweeping through an area, removing all ash trees. Every single tree will be considered. Resistant trees in a woodland setting become overwhelmed. A tree being resistant means that it is better at sealing off the disease. Now, that usually means at least sacrificing a leaf stem. When a tree is in a woodland setting, when every single leaf is becoming infected, that means complete defoliation of the tree, or at least majority defoliation. That if that weakens the tree, its walls become less strong and it becomes infected more easily. And so that's why the loss rates are so much higher for woodland environments. The best thing that we can do to protect resistant trees is to remove diseased neighbours. Your second point about Warndon villages, I have spoken to the contractor who planted it. The plan was to use ash as a nurse crop for other trees. The original plan with Warndon was that the wooded areas would have ash in them, which grows up quite quickly, quite straight on its own. That would bring up the oaks, beech, mature species that would be kept, and the ash would be preferentially thinned over the years, anticipating that ash would be 5% of the total tree population by around the noughties. That messaging has been lost to time. That plan has been not adhered to. But you're absolutely right about increasing tree diversity. The part of Worcester which is going to see the least impact from ash dieback is probably Purdeswell Park, and that's because it's got fantastic tree diversity. Really good species mixed in there.
Thank you, Chair, but Harry's already answered the question I was going to raise.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. One is it likely that every ash tree in the city is going to succumb to this disease? And I'll just ask the other one as well. If we repopulate areas with ash trees, will whatever it is that, the means of transmission, isn't it likely that those new trees are going to get it? Unless we get to the point where there are no ash trees, wait for a bit and then start again.
Ultimately, yes, we're likely to see losses of ash trees similar to what has been shown in Europe. Poland, in particular, is 30 years further on with ash dieback. They got it 30 years earlier than us, and ash trees are still present in Poland. You drive along, they're roughly of the same frequency as horse chestnut trees are here. So we will still have ash trees. We'll have more resistant specimens, and yes, we'll be collecting seed from them once we can confirm that they're particularly high resistance. In terms of replanting, you can't buy an ash tree in the UK. Nobody is selling ash whips because there are no confirmed resistant strains, except for non-native trees from Japan where the disease is native.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a simple question. We're talking about a disease, but am I right in thinking this is not, being trivial, it's not a disease that's transmitted in the way human? Is it a fungus? Is that what we're talking about? Am I right in thinking that?
Yes, it's a fungus. It's a wind-blown spore. It's similar in its effect to the Dutch elm disease, but Dutch elm disease was carried by a beetle and injected directly into the stem by the beetles burrowing. Ash dieback infects through leaf pores.
Excuse my ignorance, and I don't think I've read the answer to my question in the report, but I've got a bit of concern about, and you'll tell me I've got nothing to concern about, I'm sure, when you mention in paragraph 3.5 that sale of wood could also be invested into different products. If the spore's still on the dead wood, could that still happen, or could it still be contaminating once the tree has been felled?
The wood is inert. The infectious part is leaf litter. You see fruiting bodies of the fungus on fallen leaf stems. The wood itself is inert. If it's visibly disease-free, it's still of high value. Even if there is disease in the wood, even in the stem wood, it's still useful as firewood. Still very high value as firewood.
Therefore, there could be a lot of use which that wood could be put to, including construction of furniture and things like that. Is that right?
Furniture's a little ambitious. I don't know how much furniture we're going to be making, but yes, we could be. we could be processing wood that is felled into at least fencing materials.
Okay, is there? If not, then are we all? Is the committee happy to note the paper? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Harry. Thank you. Okay, so on to agenda item 6, the Miko Memorial Nature Park. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Chair. This report outlines a proposal for additional works with a recommendation for more funding towards facilities within a new park known as the Mako Memorial Nature Park in St John's. There's a site plan at Appendix 1 for those members who are not sure of the location, but it is bordered by an allotment site to the north, with recent new housing to the east called Wilkes Close. St John's Cemetery is to the south and Sanctuary Close is to the west. There's a public right-of-way which runs along the southern boundary, and vehicle access to the site and to the allotments is from Bromyard Road through an industrial complex and via a narrow lane called Meko Alley, and that is shown in the bottom left corner of the site plan. This report gives details about the background and how the park was originally proposed from a motion to council back in July 2019. The park would be created in memory of victims of a bombing raid on the Meko Works in World War II and include recreation facilities for the local community. A scheme was designed up to include a memorial area, seating, an orchard, pathways, fencing, a boardwalk over the wetland area, a kickabout area, and interpretation boards. The cost at this time was assessed as £30,000. In September 2020, Policy and Resources Committee received a report with 2 recommendations: to accept a sum of money from Platform Housing as part of a Section 106 agreement, and also for this council to add capital funding to become a total of £30,000 for the project. The sculpture in the memorial area would be arranged using divisional county councillor funding. A landscape architect was commissioned and started on the drawings and detailed specification early in 2022. The county council came on board with the project as they wanted to improve the public right-of-way along the southern boundary. The initial design work and phased implementation plan became available in March 2022, and the final version specified all the work as shown in item 2.9 of this report. In addition, improvements to the ecology of the site were proposed, with some targeted removal of excess vegetation to allow for better pedestrian access and to establish the new planting. The work was put out to landscape contractors to include the resurfacing of the public right-of-way funded by the County Council. Officers received 4 quotations in July, but all were more than the approved budget of £30,000. So it was agreed to approach the same 4 bidders, but using a priority list of improvements to ascertain what could be carried out for the funding available. One bidder submitted a revised quotation, and the work that could now go ahead was the ground clearance, the memorial area with seating and interpretation, the orchard, 2 areas of wildflowers, and the public right-of-way, which was to be funded by the County Council. The landscape contractor was appointed in January this year. However, the contractor came back to us stating that they no longer wish to carry out the work. Officers engaged another landscape contractor to remove the excess vegetation before the bird nesting season started, and this has now been completed. Another contractor is now about to be appointed for the hard landscaping works. On to section 3. The preferred option for this committee to consider is an additional £30,000 to achieve more facilities. These are proposed as the kickabout area, the boardwalk, steps and link paths across the wetland to create a north-south route for pedestrians walking around the park. It is proposed that the scheme is split into 2 phases. Phase 1 using the approved funding, and phase 2, if approved, will be to commission an ecological assessment and habitat survey, then install the kickabout area, boardwalk, steps and link paths. Subject to approval by council for the additional funding, then the Corporate Director for Operations, Homes and Communities, in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of this committee, has delegated approval to agree any changes in proposals up to a maximum of £30,000 should the ecological assessment and habitat survey highlight factors which limit the planned improvements. We did consider alternative options, such as, well, we didn't not to make any further improvements, but this would have the advantage of no further capital funding commitment. However, the original Section 106 agreement would not be fully met and additional facilities for the site not provided. The other alternative was to agree improvements but avoiding the wetland area. The advantage of this would be to reduce the risk of possible extra costs associated with working in a wet area. For example, discovering unsuitable ground conditions unable to support the boardwalk. And we don't know at this time whether there are protected species living there. In this instance, the phase 2 funding could be used for other improvements, such as upgrading the existing paths or a viewing platform to one side of the wet area, picnic benches, fencing, or to support other habitat enhancements across the site. Committee can see the implications for this additional scheme in section 5 of the report, but most notably that an ecological assessment and habitat surveys will need to be commissioned to inform the design of the improvements. Thank you, Chair.
Questions or comments? Richard?
Thank you, Chair. It's no surprise that I would fully support this recommendation as is in front of us, and I want to thank Lloyd and Tim for the work they've done to get us to this stage. It's been a very painful process with the problems which we've had, and I think it's fair to say some residents locally have actually gone as far as to say they doubt we'll actually start work on this project, and I'm delighted that work has now started. What has been really frustrating is some of the delays which have been caused outside of our control has caused some significant problems, and has probably been the cause for the escalating costs as a result of those delays. What has been frustrating is that we consulted with residents on the initial proposals, which are no longer affordable. And I do urge members to support what is being proposed here as a basic minimum of what can be put forward and done locally to make it a meaningful memorial to those who lost their lives during the Second World War on the neighbouring Mecco site. Anything less than what we're suggesting, I don't think would be significant enough to generate any interest locally and be called a meaningful park. And obviously, in time, I would hope it will become part of the Lornbrook Nature Reserve, and that could something which we can look at in years to come. But at the moment, the proposal which is in front of you, I think, is the best what we can get in the difficult situation, and would be very much welcomed by local residents, and it'll be hopefully a site dedicated to nature in the future, and dedicated to peace as well. So I'd ask you to support this proposal as much as you can, so we can actually get this off the ground and up and running as soon as possible.
Thank you, Richard. Anyone else? Marjorie?
I totally support the fundamental aims of this proposal to provide a memorial to the people who were killed and also to improve the area. But there's just one aspect of it which gives me a little bit of concern, and that's the kickabout area. I just wonder if that's really compatible with the rest of the scheme. I can imagine football's going into. Okay, well, let's have the answer from the officers.
Tim?
The kickabout area is actually specified in the original Section 106 agreement. So I've just taken that forward basically as part of the proposals.
Kickabout area is probably a very strong word for what is actually being proposed. It's basically an area of grassland where people can actually walk and rest and play. So calling it a kickabout area is an exaggeration, but it's a lot of the land which was lost when houses were built on is where children did play, and it's an area basically for children to play, whether with a ball or just on their own is a different matter. So, yeah, kickabout area is a terminology which has been used. It's not really a kickabout area. It's an area of grassland where people and children can play.
Chair, just 2 points from me, sorry. First of all, I just noticed the paragraph numbering has gone a bit wild in the report. That's me trying to battle between teams and words, so apologies for that to members. The second one, just for clarity, as we were drafting this report, we sought a view from the planners around the point around if we didn't do anything further to this site, so if we didn't do the phase 2 works, whether or not that would allow the Section 106 agreement to be signed off or not. The planners have confirmed that if we were just to do phase 1, they would be happy that met the Section 106 obligation. So just to make that clear for members, that's something we followed up on following the report. So just to put that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? If not, then I'll be happy to vote on the recommendations as laid out on the paper of 1.1 through to 1.4. All those in favour? Okay, is that you, Andy? Yep, I think that's everyone. That's great. Thank you. On to agenda item 7, which is the business case for the installation of additional EV charging points. David?
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to bring this rather complex report to members tonight, which is asking you to approve us taking advantage of a successful bid for nearly £70,000 worth of funding from the government's on-street residential charging scheme, which is just under 60% of the costs of installing new EV charge points in Hallow Hill and King Street car parks. And it is a grant fund that's aimed primarily at residents with no ability to charge off-street. These car parks are located within walking distance of an existing and a projected demand for overnight charging in particular from local residents, as well as providing for other use during the daytime. You recall that the core proposals in this report were previously approved by this committee back in November, and this report presents the detail in the light of that successful bid alongside a business case which recommends you to proceed with it. The business case for this, of course, is twofold. Firstly, there's a carbon reduction benefit in facilitating a move to EV and away from petrol and diesel vehicles. And then secondly, within the report, there's a financial business case, which is founded on our experience operating quite successfully the service at St Martin Gate car park over the past year, subject to various assumptions about likely future demand and usage of EV in these two car parks. So as I said, the core proposals were approved back in November by this committee. These have been amended slightly following some more detailed work looking at the costs and the timeline for installation of the network infrastructure that would be required from National Power to support this. So this is a slightly smaller scheme with capacity for 20 EVs rather than the 32 that we looked at back in November. It builds on success at St Martin's Gate, which has seen over 12,000 charging sessions and saved over 170 tonnes of carbon dioxide. At Appendix A, there's a financial summary for St Martin's Gate. which is based on the current charging costs of 39 to 49 pence per kilowatt. Taking into account that we received a capital grant of £4,000 towards that installation, we predict we'll reach a break-even point at our approved charge per kilowatt hour during this coming financial year of 23-24. Without that capital grant, the break-even point would have stretched into 26-27 before we began to break even at that. The report predicts, and it's well known really, that demand for electrical vehicles is only going to increase with the ban on new petrol and diesel vehicles that comes in 2023. Not 2023, is it? I mistyped that. 2030. Yes, indeed. About a third of Worcester residents don't have a driveway for off-street charging and therefore can't install their own EV charge point. And we've data, demographic data that shows the distribution of households with this propensity to move to EV, but without off-street parking. And there's a significant number within walking distance of the two car parks proposed in the report. And this information was fundamental really to the success of our bid for this grant fund, which is for off-street parking. There'll be an EV charging strategy for Worcester that's going to be brought to this committee in the future, in the summer. What I can say at the moment is the proposals within this report are in line with that draft strategy, so it will be aligned with that. It's proposed that we continue with the supplier who's provided and maintained the hardware and software at SMG. I mean, that'll be subject to the council's usual procurement, but that's the intention at this stage. That's worked very well for us. The capital spend for the installation is already allocated within the approved capital programme. And our commitment here for this project is up to £55,000 against a grant funding of £68,000. The business case also looks at the ongoing revenue costs. Our fixed revenue costs for this project would be approximately £17,000 a year. That includes maintenance, insurance, software, cost of borrowing and repayment. Our variable costs of electricity are currently 18 pence per kilowatt hour. All the figures in this business case are based on current costs, although members be aware that the energy market can be varied, and so those no doubt will change in the future. But just wanted to make you aware that all the business case here is based on current costs and charges. There is an allowance here for a loss of parking revenue. There's a potential loss at King Street, which is a well-used car park. So the ATV bays will take out 10 normal parking spaces. Users will pay for the cost of parking between 7 in the morning and 9 o'clock at night. So if you're charging, you also pay for parking. But in the early years, there may be times when the EV bays are empty and not available for use by fossil-fueled vehicles. There undoubtedly would be some displacement to other council car parks and also to other providers. We've made an allowance of £10,000 a year for this potential loss within the business case. Tallow Hill, on the other hand, has good capacity for parking, so we're not making any allowance for a loss of parking revenue. Looking at the income, current charge for fast charges is 39 pence per kilowatt hour. The council's agreed policy is to charge a market rate, which reflects the cost of electricity, demand and competition. Any surplus that we made can be invested into the service and support future expansion where capital funding may not be available. If you look closely at the business case, the capital funding and the grant funding is quite crucial for us in making a viable financial business case for this. So on that, there is a break-even point. We've calculated an estimated break-even point in terms of usage. That's detailed in Appendix 3 at the project-wide level. It's also broken down by car parks. At that project-wide level, the break-even usage would be 86 average charging sessions per week across the two car parks. That comes down to each charger being used 4.3 times per week, at which point we would break even. breaking it down by car park, there's a higher figure for King Street for usage. That reflects on that loss of potential loss of parking revenue. Usage of St Martin's Gate, it's not directly comparable because most of the charges there are for shorter stay rapid charge, which is a 50 kilowatt charger compared to the proposed 7 and 22 kilowatts that were within this bid. But I just thought it'd be useful to give you the comparison that the current run rate at St Martin's Gate is around 300,000 kilowatt hours per annum of charge. The break-even point for the proposals in this report is less than half that figure, I think 134,000. So it just gives you a bit of order of magnitude and context on that. To note that standard parking charges will apply for customers using the chargers. Parking, of course, is free between 9 o'clock at night and 7 o'clock in the morning. It's likely then that during the daytime, the chargers will be used on a charge as you park. So users that are coming to park in the car park will also charge whilst they're there. Overnight, it'll be more park as you charge. So people that want to charge rather than park will come to the car park and charge up and park at the same time. There's sort of two different types of behaviour that we've seen around EV charging. There are multiple variations in terms of alternative options, as you can imagine. The proposals in this report are based on the successful grant award, information we have on demand, projected demand, and also a scale of project that can be delivered over this summer and get this into use as soon as we possibly can. The main implications are covered within the body of the report. I'd invite members to approve the recommendations, but obviously very happy to take questions. Thank you, Chair.
Do we have any?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I've got two questions. The first one, you mentioned about how there would be a loss of some of the parking bays to allow for these charging bays instead. My concern is that, let's say somebody goes to park in Tallow Hill and the only place available is an electric vehicle charging point. Are they going to get penalised if they park in there but don't want to charge? Because that wouldn't seem fair if that was the only place where they could park in the car park. Does that make sense? And the second question, I know these are going to be put where they are for geographical purposes because that's where there's a demand because people don't have drives. What's to stop somebody driving halfway across the city and rocking up and using these car parking spaces and charging? And if there's nothing to stop them, is that allowed? Because it sort of defeats the purpose if people are going to start doing it. Not that people are automatically going to do that, but there's a chance that might happen. Those are my two questions.
Thank you, Councillor. Regarding your first question, the existing parking order, which requires a slight amendment for this, but as it operates in St Martin's Gate, is that you are required to be actively charging whilst using one of the EV bays. Yes, potentially you would receive a fixed penalty notice for parking a diesel vehicle in an EV bay, which would then prevent somebody else coming in and using it. Hence the potential loss of parking revenue, because it does take that bay out of usage for all vehicles. This is, I guess we're at an early stage in this market, and over time, as numbers of EV vehicles increase, it'll even out, and no doubt we'll want to put more EV chargers in at some point. In regard to your second question, these will be open to anybody. So yes, if somebody wants to walk further and park overnight, then they'll be very welcome to. And we will keep an eye on demand as time goes on and potentially come back and look to increase our capacity.
Thank you. Andy? No. Okay. Richard?
Yes, thank you, Chair. On the basis of it, I fully support what's being recommended here today, but I've got a number of concerns and issues which I'd like to raise. First of all, we're behind most local authorities in the country by not allowing charging machines to be placed on the highway. And I think that is still something which we should be challenging and asking for the cooperation of the Highways Authority for us to actually change. Because we're not going to get success in this area unless we can have a wider area of potential charging points in houses across the city, which can allow charging points to be placed on the highway, whether that be through channels in the concrete, through other ways, but it's still not acceptable that we have to reserve these to city council car parks because the county council are not playing ball and are refusing to cooperate. The other issue which I've got a concern about is the concentration of all these charging points in one area, geographical area of the city centre. I can understand the reasons for that, but when you look at the other areas of the city, for instance in St John's, which I would talk about, within 10 minutes walk of St John's Church, there are 2,000 people who don't have off-street parking and would dearly love to have an opportunity to have an electric vehicle, but can't because they've got nowhere to charge it. So I do think in the future we do need to seriously start looking at areas outside the city centre, in the more residential areas, maybe at our community centres, Downs Green Community Centre, the Green Centre, the Roxwood, Tollerdine, elsewhere, could be areas where we could actually install charging machines, which could be used by the local communities. And also maybe Tybridge Street car park in St John's, which is still classed as city centre, but is on the other side of the river and would be more local for the other side of the river, residents the other side of the river. So I'd like to see potentially in the future, when we review what we're doing, a greater balance of choices of locations outside the city centre, so even more residents can actually use charging vehicles, and potentially looking at our own sites, such as sports centres and community centres in outlying parts of the city. I'm not sure how realistic that would be, but it's something I would certainly like to see further exploration of.
Chair, I can pick those. If I pick your first point up first. We are working with officers at the County Council on consulting on the EV charging strategy. We've developed that. The issue you raised about on-street parking you're absolutely right. That's one of Highways policy. Our approved sustainability strategy does reference this, that at the moment we weren't proposing that. We need to work with the County Council, but officers are working very closely together, and I can't answer more really for County Council policy on that. Your second point, hopefully, Councillor, I can give you some comfort on that. We've had lots of discussions about the potential for community centres, as you suggest. At this early stage, we had a grant opportunity. The capital funding really helps with the business case. I think our next stage is then to start looking at sites further out, leisure centres, community centres. That will sort of spread the opportunity around the city. Tybridge Street brings some challenges with flooding, so that one needs to be looked at very carefully. But certainly our strategy will start to look at widening the pool from where we are at the moment.
Just a brief supplementary, Chair. We're looking, and wearing my licensing committee chair's hat, we are looking to try and create an all-electric taxi fleet by 2030, and it may be something which we may wish to use in our lobbying in our campaign with the County Council to, in the first instance, allow some charging points to take place in our taxi ranks around the city, so taxis at least would be able to charge their vehicles, especially as we're trying to give money to taxi drivers to actually change their fleet to a more electric, more environmentally friendly vehicle. It may be something worthy of some consideration.
Chair, there's one more point, just to pick up, of course, on the St John's side of the river, that the university's development at the Riverside campus, at the Severn campus, sorry, has got 100 EV charge points in there. I was there last week having a look around there with university officers, and I understand that a good number of those will be available for public use as well. So it's a good resource on that side of the city, albeit right on the riverbank.
It's very useful to know, and if they are available for public use, I would certainly be happy to give that some publicity locally, and I'd welcome more information about that.
I'd just like some reassurance about the capabilities of the actual chargers, because there's a variety of connectors that electric cars have, and I have myself occasionally arrived somewhere thinking I could charge my car and found that I couldn't because my car wasn't compatible with what was on offer. So I just like to be sure that that all the well-known sorts of connectors are catered for.
Yeah, without sort of going into the actual detail of individual vehicles, I mean, at a webinar this afternoon, actually, I understand there is a common standard sort of being introduced now, so that problem is beginning to move away. Of course, as the operator that we're procuring with and ourselves, we want these to be available to as many vehicles as possible. So there's nothing that we would like to build into a strategy that would prevent anybody using the chargers.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I read this report from the point of view of the motorist, and there's some fundamental things in here which I can't make head or tail of. I know what a kilowatt hour is, but I haven't the faintest idea how many are required to fill up a battery on a car from empty to full, how long that takes. I know it's going to cost 39 pence a kilowatt hour, but there's nothing in this report which gives me any idea how much it would cost if my battery was close to empty to plug into a charging point until it was full, and how long that would take. That information is what the public need to know. The other thing is we're looking at this break-even point, which it seems we're not very far away from the way these figures are pointing. Presumably, once we've reached the break-even point, we start making a profit. And I would just question whether we need to be in too much of a hurry to turn this into a profit-making business, rather than using the incentive to get people out of old-style cars into electric vehicles. So it would be good to see that we are keeping one eye on making this as competitive as possible for road users. I repeat the point I made about this, that kilowatt hours, it means absolutely nothing to me as far as being a motorist. It's an extension of the philosophy that we still use miles per gallon and buy our fuel in litres. So nobody knows where the hell they are. This just makes that calculation even more difficult.
Right. Thank you, Chair. On your first point, in the report, it mentions an average charge of being 30 kilowatt hours. Technology is changing all the time. I think an average vehicle will probably take around 50 kilowatt hours. Some of them are pushing up to 100. Some of them are a little bit lower. And then you have a rate of charge. So there are different rates of charges. The proposals in this report are either a 7 kilowatt, which would take you just over 4 hours for an average session. So hence an overnight charge of 4 to 6 hours if your vehicle's empty. There's also some 22 kilowatt hour chargers, a couple of those in there, which fill 3 times as quickly. I believe on the market now 75 kilowatt hour chargers are available on motorway service stations. You pay a premium for those. They can fill you up in an hour fairly quickly. There's all sorts of behaviours around charging. We think most people actually prefer to top up rather than run into empty. That sort of range anxiety, I think, is the phrase that's used. So an overnight charge at 7 kilowatts is really appropriate. And I think EV users are very aware of what 7 kilowatt hours means and how much they need to fill up. That's their litres and miles per gallon. The second point is we are able to amend our pricing and charging strategy. So council's policy is that we apply a market rate, and of course demand is part of that. Encouraging people to take up EVs is one of the priorities of the council. Equally, this needs to be a business that certainly doesn't lose money for the council, and those are assumptions that are put within that report. You know, we'll monitor that closely to see how those pan out once we start.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more questions or comments? No? Okay, well, thank you for that, David. So Are we happy to vote on the recommendations as laid out in the paper from 1.1 to 1.5? All those in favour? Yep, that's everyone. Thank you. Okay, on to agenda item 8, which is a strategic review of Ashwood Cemetery and Crematorium. Are you taking it? Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, this is the first report we've brought on this project. It had featured on the committee scorecard previously, but this is the first time we've brought it to members. And basically, it looks to update members on the work to date and seeks approval for funding of up to £100,000 in order to take the project onto the next stage, utilising specialist project management and specialist support. So the background to the report just talks a little bit about Ashwood as a site, and I'll just pick up some of the key highlights there. So the service undertakes around 1,700 cremations a year and 100 burials each year, and that includes St John's Cemetery as well as Ashwood. And at Ashwood, cremation is provided through 3 gas cremators that were installed in 1997. Currently, Ashwood has 63 formal car parking spaces, but there are occasions for big funerals where vehicles will also park on the network of roads running through the site. In respect of burial space, we estimate that Ashwood has between 10 and 15 years remaining, and St John's has around 3 years remaining. And a report on the future of St John's Cemetery will be presented to this committee during 23-24. We've included Appendix 2 the number of burials and cremations undertaken since 2011-2012, so just over a 10-year period. And members will see that the number of burials and cremations have decreased over the last 10 years. And that's predominantly down to 2 factors. The first factor around burials is that generally we are seeing less requests for burials year on year, with cremations being more popular request. But there are 3 anomalies to that. We saw a high death rate in 2015, which picked the burial rate up. As we've, I think, discussed or reported to members previously, with the temporary closure of Cheltenham Crematorium in 2017, we also saw some business move northwards, which we picked up, and obviously we saw an increase in death rate as part of wave 1 of the pandemic as well in 2020. So there were artificial spikes in burial rates. In respect of cremations, up until December 2018, Ashwood was the primary site serving South Worcestershire. And then in 2018, late 2018, the Vale Crematorium at Fladbury opened, and we saw a noticeable impact on our demand for cremations. Our demand went down. And through the work Doug has done with funeral directors, it's quite evident that that site is geographically more convenient for families who are based out that way and who have connections with that part of the world, but also logistically for funeral directors, it makes sense as well, rather than be travelling over to a site in a different city or different town. But as I say, cremation clearly remains the most popular form of funeral, with on average over 95% of total funerals being managed in that way. Obviously, we've seen the declining number of cremations, and that's resulted in reduced income, and therefore we've reset our budgets to reflect that change. But what that also means that there is reduced capacity for investment at the same time. But we're also conscious that there is a growing need to improve the facility, both due to the age of it and the need to upgrade and modernise it, but also to ensure that we're not just maintaining market share, but also trying to capture new market share as well. But there are technical and legislative pressures connected with that and connected with the asset and the facility, which I'll outline in a moment. Some members, it may come as a surprise too that we have no statutory obligation to cremate. That is a local decision. That's a commercial decision for a council to take. The only statutory obligations that are on us as a burial authority are to manage, repair and improve existing burial sites. and also the recording and safe storage of records relating to burials and deeds of existing rights, and obviously to process exhumations when we receive requests. So like I say, no statutory duty on us to cremate, and that is a local decision and a commercial decision. Not that we are proposing at this stage that that's not something that we discontinue. That's certainly not the case. Just in respect of the cremators at Astwood, like I say, we're served by 3 gas-fired cremators. They were installed in 1997. And we believe that we're now one of only very few sites in the country that use the type of cremator that we have. One of the big operating challenges to us is that even though our cremators are well serviced, maintained, and they're currently functioning well, and they meet all relevant criteria, there is now only one company in the UK that services them. And that's further exacerbated by them having one very experienced engineer who can handle our machines, and nobody else, we're told, on the workforce, and that individual is approaching retirement. So there's a single point of failure issue for us. However, the biggest challenge for us is that our cremators are now past their reasonable shelf life. The industry standard is that cremators should be in place for 20 to 25 years. And therefore, the longer that we continue to operate ours, the more cost they are likely to bear, and the more risk there is of downtime and issues. And there's a growing sense that our cremators will need to be replaced by 2027, not just because of their age, but because of the environmental driver around emission standards that I'll talk about in a second. Just in respect of mercury abatement, back in 2005, DEFRA issued a requirement that that 50% of all cremations in the UK needed to be abated for mercury. And a scheme was put in place that allowed crematoriums that didn't wish to go down that route to be able to pay another crematorium to offset that impact. And some of that was down to financial reasons, and some of that was down to technical reasons and being able to install abatement equipment into existing sites. At the time, we chose to enter into what we call a burden sharing scheme with Cardiff. And therefore, from 2013 onward, we chose to enter into that scheme with Cardiff, and we pay them circa £30,000 a year to offset our emissions. So they have abatement in place, we don't, and we offset that by paying Cardiff that sum of money. And in 2018, I think David was involved in this. We commissioned a project to investigate the feasibility of installing mercury abatement at Astwood. But at the time, it was concluded that there wasn't enough room within the existing building or the wider development footprint to be able to install it. And the technical rationale is that in order to introduce mercury abatement, you need to cool the gases down to such an extent that you need long lengths of pipework and ductwork. And anybody that knows Astwood, we haven't got a huge operating footprint, so there was a restraint there. In respect of the guidance, the environmental guidance notes that sit around crematoria, it states that all new crematoria are required to fit the abatement plant to remove not just mercury, but dioxins as well. And therefore we've started to talk to Worcester Regulatory Services, about whether if we replaced the crematorium at Astwood, would that be regarded as a new crematoria or a replacement crematoria, and whether that requirement to install that level of abatement would be required. We're getting a sense, however, that whether it be replacement or new, that by 2027 we do need to install that additional level of abatement that currently the site doesn't benefit from. And this all adds to where I'll finish up with this report, that there is much more work to do to be able to bottom out whether or not Astwood is technically feasible to continue to operate that, or whether we need to look at an alternative location. The emerging guidance is seeming to suggest there may be an exemption from that requirement. like I say, where a site for practical and technical reasons can't retrofit abatement because of the inability to expand, for instance, the draft guidance is suggesting that there may be an exemption that maybe we may be able to look at again. The further work we need to do needs to investigate that in more detail. So it's clear to us that even though we've done quite a bit of work to date, and there's still further work that needs to be done to understand the redevelopment and operating opportunities at Astwood, given some of those challenges that I've outlined. Given some of the challenges that have come to light, one of the things we felt it was prudent to do was to talk to our planners about the option of locating away or relocating away from Astwood and what that would involve. And the advice that we've had to date from planning was very much around what they call the sequential test. So there would be a series of tests that we would need to meet if we were submitting a planning application for a new site. And it would boil down to the planners asking us the question, what are the business, what are the technical reasons, what are the commercial reasons that you need to move away from a site that already benefits from planning permission, and you take up a new site somewhere else that doesn't. And therefore, that's also sort of focused our minds that there is more work to do in respect of absolutely bottoming out what the redevelopment potential is at Astwood. Paragraph 3.2 of the report, I've just listed out there some of the key questions that we will be asking ourselves over the next weeks and months in order to respond to that challenge from planning. And obviously that will form part of the report that we will bring back to this committee sometime during 23-24 that updates you on this project. So in terms of the preferred option, we need to fully understand whether the continued use of Astwood for cremations is feasible. And then we need to build a programme of work around that, led by specialist project resource, working alongside Doug and fellow internal colleagues. And we also need to appoint specialist contractors where required. I think Doug and the team, with an appointed consultant, have done a fantastic job to date. But given the 2027 deadline, we need to move this on with pace. We need specialist advice around a number of areas, planning, legal. And so, therefore, you know, this report is asking for that funding approval to allow us to get on and do that and start to move this project on at a pace. For those members involved with some of the regeneration projects, it's a very similar type of support that we deliver around high streets and cultural fund work. So that type of work is already going on in the council, that type of sort of governance framework. And that's what we wish to continue doing with this project. In terms of the funding, we're seeking approval for £100,000 to allow us to undertake that work. Some members will know we have a crematorium reserve, and that was created as a sinking fund to ensure there was funding available to support the costs of cremated development or replacement. That reserve currently has a balance of just over £400,000. We've agreed to set some of that aside to allocate it to help with setting of the budget for this year. That leaves a balance of £300,000. So if members approve the £100,000 tonight, that would take that reserve down to £200,000. And talking to Shane, he wanted me to reassure members that the replacement of cremators will be a capital sum and therefore can be funded through the capital programme. We won't be relying on this reserve. Replacement will be dealt with elsewhere. The other thing that's I think has been crystallised that this will be a major project for the council, whether it's redevelopment on Astwood or whether it's redevelopment on another site. This will probably be a project of scale that we've not seen in this council for some time, and therefore we'll look to use the major programme reference group to oversee the project. And there's also a feeling that at some stage it may be that we transfer the project into the realms of Policy and Resources Committee, given the scale of it and the costs involved with it. But obviously we will continue to keep this committee updated as the relevant policy committee. Chair, I think I'll stop there and happy to take any questions.
Okay. So, Richard, you indicated you wanted to ask some questions?
Yeah, if I may, two questions. First of all, the £100,000 figure seems pretty pretty decisive. How have we come across to that figure? Have we got a preferred bidder and a partner already in place, which we've done pre-negotiation to, so we know the price? Or is there going to be some sort of procurement process where we'll be shopping in the market for that kind of specialised advice and support? Secondly, I wonder whether there's any market out there or possibility of actually transferring the entire operation to the private sector and basically selling the service, outsourcing the service to one of the large commercial funeral directors, for instance, who do run cremation sites and burial grounds up and down the country. I think the biggest one is Glasgow, which is run by the CWS Cooperative Group, and Shrewsbury is run by the Cooperative Group, and Dignity run others. So I do wonder if there's opportunity there which we haven't looked at, whether there is an opportunity for us to actually outsource the service to a private sector provider who would actually make this investment on our behalf and be a commercial organisation running it for a commercial profit. It's done elsewhere. Most local authorities have gone down that route. I do wonder why we haven't.
Just to answer the first question, Chair, no, we've got no, we've not set a figure based on a predetermined conversation with one party or not. But I think it'll be horses for courses how we spend that money. For instance, we were in a meeting today. We need to seek some council advice or an environmental planning matter. There will be a cost to that. We will need to engage the chambers, and members will know how costly barrister advice is. So, you know, it'll be horses for courses as to whether we need to procure something or whether there's a need to move swiftly to seek some advice. Because we are conscious, like I say, there is a date in the back of our minds when this needs to be done by. In respect of Councillor Udall's second point, a range of operating models we are very conscious about, one of those being some sort of JV, and the report that will come back to members will include that as part of the appraisal, but for commercial reasons, probably not one for discussion this evening.
And it's actually, so in recommendation 1.3 references future operating model. So it's actually in the recommendation.
So, Lloyd's most query, but what's the procurement process which we'll actually go through in order to find the consultant in question who will give us support?
It's not just one consultant, Chair. This will be a range of advice. So it could be planning advice, it'll be environmental advice, it'll be legal advice. So sorry if I didn't explain myself very well. I think it'll be a range of options depending on what advice we need. But it's not going to be one consultant.
Owen?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Lloyd probably just answered my question indirectly. It was just that I can see which way the wind's blowing with this. This either needs to be rebuilt or relocated. And my worry was, do we really need to pay someone 100 grand to underline what we really already know? But you've explained it by saying that that's not to one consultant, that's to a range of things. So that makes a lot more sense to me now you answered Richard's question, because I thought if we've only got 300 grand, 100 of it seems an awful lot for someone to just rubber stamp what we think. So that makes more sense. You answered.
Simon?
Yeah, I'm on the same page as Richard and Owen. When I first saw this item on the agenda, there wasn't a report, but the words leapt out of the page, £100,000 to undertake technical feasibility work. And having read the report, I'm not really seeing anything in here which is explaining how that £100,000 figure has been arrived at and why it couldn't have been 50,000 or 300,000. That information is largely absent. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here, but nothing to help us, as far as I can see, make sense of the £100,000 figure.
So we've based the £100,000 on the way that the council and officers have worked with specialist resource that has managed the High Streets Fund project. So we've brought somebody in that's program managed that for us, and that individual comes with a planning stroke development control background. So what we feel is, given the extent of that regeneration project, albeit this is not a regeneration project as such, that sort of approach would benefit us. So otherwise, what you would have is Doug managing an operational service every day, and a bit of me trying to manage and trying to oversee the delivery of a potentially 12, 15 million pound project. We've simply not got the time, we've not got the capacity to be able to do that. And being quite blunt as well, we've probably not got between us the actual skill set to be able to do that as well. So if I could chunk it up into two bits, Councillor Cronin, it's that resource to help us with the programme management of this project. And then the other chunk of this would be seeking specialist advice around planning, legal matters, environmental matters. We've used a consultant to date to support us with the work. We need to use them or another specialist contractor in this particular area as well. So it's both those aspects.
Any more questions or comments? No? Okay then, so we're happy to vote on the recommendations as laid out on the papers as 1.1 through to 1.3. All those in favour? Yep, that's everyone. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So on to agenda item 9, which is the proposed committee performance scorecard. So yourself again, Lloyd? Sandra?
Thank you, Chair. For those obviously familiar with the reports that we provide at committee regarding the scorecard, this is the revised version that we're looking at our next 12 months priorities that will come back to committee and report, and obviously our performance indicators as well. In Appendix 1, if you can look at the projects and activities, we're hoping to complete PERD as well by the end of this month, so this will be removed from our projects and activities. The Riverside improvements and also looking at obtaining green flag is currently ongoing, so we're going to transfer that over into next committee cycle. The public bin investment programme, as you're all aware, we're currently now looking at the recycling on the go bins, so we're proposing to keep that in committee until the end of next financial year. And also looking at the waste and recycling collection review, looking at starting the implementation in July 23, but also keeping our eye on the food waste that we'll be looking at weekly collections, but at this stage we haven't got indications of how that is going to progress at present, but we'll be keep reporting back to committee. Obviously the car park signage project will be ongoing until September 23, so we're proposing to keep that on the agenda. And the biodiversity action plan that we produced a report a few months ago that will continue to look at ward members' requests and enhance obviously the wildflower programme across the city. Sustainability action plan will be ongoing, and the Greens Home Grant delivery scheme will complete at the end of this month as well, with the tree planting continuing as an ongoing programme until 27, and again we'll link in with our Ash Dieback. One of the new proposed projects that we're looking at is around electrification of the council's fleet. A few months ago we discussed regarding the RCVs, but we're looking across the whole fleet. We're not envisaging that by 2025 we will be totally electric across the fleet, but that will be around the plan and looking at that sustainability and the replacement programme across our fleet, across the city's services. We've removed the green flag for Ashwood Cemetery. That has been completed. We will still continue to apply for that each year, and hopefully we'll still get that awarded, but we're removing that as a major project. I'll quickly just take you through the PIs. We have increased some of the targets because we want to start moving towards greater recycling and composting. So you can see that we have obviously increased the targets, and we're going to look at that year on year. We haven't got any central government targets yet to focus on, but we do think that we need to start looking at that quality of the recyclate across the city. And then I think one of the main ones that we have removed is around the total garden waste collected per customer. We're going to change the way that we're showing that from the removal of the garden waste from the residual. I'm thinking unless anybody's got any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Any questions or comments? Robin?
Thank you, Chair. You discussed the ash dieback alongside the green canopy using that data collection point. Will we be reporting trees replaced as part of ash dieback programme within the total figure or separately?
We'll report it separately.
Right. Thank you.
Got Simon next.
Thank you, Chair. I might be stretching a point here, but on page 37, the top item there, satisfaction with street cleansing, it reminded me that there is nothing in here relating to the cleaning of the gullies. Now, the City Council certainly in the past have done that on behalf of the County Council. So first question is, do we still do that? And if the answer is yes, the second question is, well, why aren't we? Because the gullies in London Road, every drain cover is silted right up to road level. Now, we're already subject to some fairly substantial rainfalls from time to time. If the gullies aren't taking rainwater off the road, then it's going to create a massive problem at the bottom of London Road.
Through Chair, we don't actually clean the gullies, but we obviously do the street sweeping, but County's got responsibility of the gully cleaning.
Can I just ask when that function was passed back to the county? Because I know we did do it on behalf of the county.
I would need to go back and check, Councillor, when that stopped. It was before my time.
I come back to my second question then, which is why isn't it happening? Because it needs to be done.
Okay, I think this is sort of moving away from the what's being presented as our KPI. So, but obviously you can take it up with officers externally if you want. Okay, Richard.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I hope you're not going to say the same thing to what I'm just going to ask. The garden waste collected per customer, 234 kilograms. It's good, but it could obviously be better. And we are not getting as many customers as we used to have. I know, for instance, I've stopped using this service myself. For a variety of reasons, which I won't go into. One of the complaints which I regularly receive is the service does not operate during the darkest of winter months. Now, I know I've raised this before, but it's when the autumnal leaves are falling is when some people need this service the most. Would we be able to generate more income and more tonnage if we actually extended the service into the winter months, even if it's not such a regular collection as every 2 weeks?
Chair, I think unless Sandra corrects me, I think our garden waste numbers have gone up. Our actual garden waste number of customers has gone up, not down. Yeah, but Sandra can pick me up if I'm wrong. I think there's a sweet point with garden waste. If we extend the service, we might need more resource, extra truck, extra staff, and therefore, if we've not got the custom that's able to pay for that, we would actually run a deficit. It's not unusual. We're not alone in operating a garden waste service just over a certain sort of what we call growing period. And I think, you know, to date, we've probably landed on a commercial decision that it wouldn't be in our interest to do that. So that's generally how it works out.
Marjorie?
Thank you, Chair. I'm asking for information that again, is a bit on the sideline of compared to what's in the report. But it looks to me like the targets for recycling are quite low, and it would be interesting to know how they compare to other cities of our size.
I can't provide that information for you at this moment in time, Councillor, but I can get that information, especially around the districts. I can get the comparisons like for like of all the recycling and the residual waste, if that will be useful.
I think it's also worth adding that it is an area that we're working on. We've had papers come to previous committees to try and drive that and increase that. We see that as something that we want to improve. So, yeah, and I think obviously the government targets will also be more stringent in the future. So it will be an area that we'll continue to work on. Any more questions or comments? No? Okay then, so we're happy to we're voting to approve the recommendation as per 1.1. All those in favour? That's everyone. Okay, thank you. And I think that's the last formal one. Just got one item of any other business, and that's just to say that this will be my last experience as chair of the Environment Committee, because I won't be seeking re-election in May. So just want to thank you all for your contributions, and also officers for your support, because being chair for the last 2 years and vice chair for the previous 2 has probably been the highlight of my time on the council. So just want to say thank you all very much.